few years ago, when I was working for a wildlife blog, I was lucky enough to get to travel to Japan and photograph multiple notable locations. This story is about a bamboo forest in Arashiyama, Kyoto, as I never made it to any of the other cities I planned. The forest was called Sagano. It was apparently teeming with insects and wild monkeys. Sounds like a great location to shoot for a nature website, right? So here I am, fresh out of college. I had only been at my current job for a few months, and they sent me across the world for some field work. Prior to the trip, I was mainly editing photos and writing articles about local hikes. The blog was growing fairly popular, especially with travelers, so we decided it was time to expand, focus more on travel alongside wildlife. I guess I was the easiest person to send since I still lived at home and no spouse, no kids, no pets. I mean, it seemed pretty logical to me. I also want to mention just how stoked I was to get to go to Japan. I grew up watching anime and I had moved through that uncomfortable phase in middle school where I was completely obsessed with the culture. I remember drawing little people that had big anime eyes and cat ears during class and trying to cover them with my hands when people would walk by. At the time of the travel, I was no longer as obsessed, but it had always been a dream of mine to get to go there, experience their culture firsthand. The flight was, ironically, one of the best flights I've ever had. In the past, I was always on the cheapest airline with my knees basically crammed up against the seat in front, sandwiched into the middle seat. I'm not very outspoken, so I wasn't even going to argue. But they always seemed to be ready to fight to the death over the seats. Anyway, the flight there was pretty great, spacious. I sat by the window with a person on the aisle and nobody between us. And there were no small children crying and screaming. This seemed to set the mood for an amazing trip. But I was not prepared for what would happen to me in 2 days. I'm going to try my best to get to the point of the story. So, I'm going to skip on a few of the details of the first day there. The hotel was small and a bit run down, but it was still pretty cheerful and in a nice area. I'd taken a nap as soon as I unpacked in the early evening. I wasn't tired enough to sleep all the way through my first night since I had slept on the flight most of the way. So I took a walk around the neighborhood in Kyoto, and then I went to watch some YouTube videos until I could go sightseeing. My boss agreed that my first day in each city didn't have to be work. I could go sightseeing all I wanted as long as I got things done in the next few days. After I was done seeing the sights, I would go and photograph the locations that I was sent for. I was starting in Kyoto, then I would head to Osaka, and then Nagoya, and then I would fly out of Tokyo. I went out to eat at a touristy type of restaurant, went to a few bars, enjoyed a museum, and then checked out a local market. It was like being in a dream, honestly. I was having such a great time, and I couldn't wait until I could get to the Sagano bamboo forest the next day. I had Googled pictures countless times in the weeks leading up to my trip, and every single time, I was imagining getting great shots for the blog. Monkeys posing for me or macro-lens close-ups of intricately patterned moths. Fast forward to the next day. I've got my hiking outfit on, my expensive camera, a bag of equipment, bug repellent sprayed on, a map, snacks, a mini umbrella in case it decided to rain, even though there was no forecast, and a new translator app, since my old one didn't go well with the people at the museum the day before. I looked like a nerdy tourist, but I didn't care. It was very hard to find the entrance to the forest. There was one small sign that pointed me in the general direction, and it was very easy to miss, especially when trying to read a language you can hardly speak or understand. I was already running late by the time I made it there. It was early afternoon. I would have to stay here until the sun was almost down to make up for my lost time. It seemed easy enough. Sagano was not a huge park, 16 square kilometers, and it was pretty close to civilization, even having some temples and residencies within it. I had also learned about a week before my trip that the monkeys were in a separate park nearby, so it would be highly unlikely that I'd see one. But I didn't mind, since there would still be a lot of material there. It was supposed to be about a 4-hour hike uphill, and then ending with a traditional Japanese villa previously owned by a famous actor. The forest itself was very crowded and touristy. I saw many other Westerners, and even a family that was visiting from Dubai. It consisted of a path with a bamboo railing on each side of the path that you took through. I already knew this when I saw pictures of it online, but I was expecting more places to go off trail on my own. I didn't really see any that looked promising, other than locals dressed up for people to pose and take pictures with, which I definitely did. The deeper you went into the forest, though, the less you could hear the sounds of the city, until eventually all you could hear was the buzzing of insects, the chirping of birds, and the leaves swaying in the wind. And of course, the huge crowds of people. This place was beautiful, absolutely breathtaking. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before growing up. The sound of the wind in the bamboo was easily one of the most amazing things I'd ever heard. Almost great enough to make me come back to that place. I had taken a lot of pictures by the halfway mark mid-afternoon, but I wasn't satisfied with most of them. It was very hard to keep people out of them. Most of the wildlife would stray far from the path and the noisy tour group, and I knew that I had to go explore off trail in order to find anything worthwhile. So, as I was walking and I saw a break in the barricade, I took that as a sign that I should go off the trail there, and I started to stray behind until I eventually found an opportunity to slip away. I tried my best to move fast and quietly to get away with nobody noticing as soon as possible so that I could go deeper into the grove. My plan was a success. Nobody had seemed to notice me, so it was very likely I would be alone and unhindered. The further I walked, the less I heard people, until I heard nothing but nature. This place was not huge, like I previously stated, but I had walked for maybe another hour and a half, and there was still no sign of any other humans. It was definitely strange looking back on it. but I paid no mind to it that day. I did end up taking some pretty great shots. Lots of birds and insects, but notably a tanuki, a couple of wild ferrets, the mamushi. Lucky me, I found the only venomous snake in the area, and quite a large toad. I was most definitely more satisfied with the pictures I got in the late afternoon, but time had gotten the best of me. I knew it would be dark before I got back to the path. I did not want to be stuck in a forest after dark, no matter how small. I had seen the Blair Witch Project enough times. The hike back was rough, because I was a bit fatigued and definitely feeling the weight of my backpack. I had to slow down quite considerably due to the bamboo being more dense in my area. The sun had set completely, and I knew that I would be hiking another 45 minutes to an hour before I even got back to the path. The good thing was, at least, that I had been told that the path would be lit. So I turned on my phone's flashlight and I started to hustle more, because my insect repellent had worn off and I was now being eaten alive by bugs. It was not long after my projected time that I saw some light up ahead, so I did what anybody would do, and I headed straight for it. Everything that happens after this is both a blur and my most vivid memories. Please excuse me on some of the details of what I experienced. I never thought I would be writing this down because all I wanted to do was forget it. I still do, but I have accepted that I never will. It was no shock to me to find a small shrine-like hut in the forest. I later learned I should have been shocked. But it was a bit shocking that I didn't seem to be anywhere near the path. I was exhausted, and the sound of my own pulse coupled with the insects buzzing was nearly deafening by this point. When I was able to enter the small clearing, I instantly realized that one of the sounds I had been hearing was music. It was so subtle and gentle that I had somehow not registered in my brain. After noticing the sound of this music, I noticed something almost as obvious. Right next to the candle-lit shrine was a woman. I presumed it to be one of the actors. She was sitting cross-legged, facing away from me. She was the source of the music. She was playing one of those Japanese guitar-like instruments. She was obviously quite skilled, as much as I hate to admire anything about that night. It wasn't too long after I'd entered the clearing that she started singing. It was all in Japanese, and so I hardly understood any of the words enough to tell you what it was about, but while listening to her song, I noticed she was facing a pond. The water was so dark that I could hardly see it, except for the reflection of the candles. Her song seemed so soothing, I almost forgot I was lost. And as much as I wanted to get out of there and back to my hotel, I was also painfully shy. So shy that I was too afraid to interrupt her mid-song and startle her. So I just stood there and waited for her to finish. But that was the thing. She would never finish. She always started the song again from the beginning. In retrospect, the song was not soothing at all. It sounded mournful. After probably half an hour of her singing her song over and over, I worked up the strength to speak to her. But I took another 15 minutes before the words would actually leave my mouth. I cleared my throat, and then I spoke. "Excuse me?" I spoke up quietly. There was no response, but she definitely heard me. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I had the sudden urge to photograph this moment, since the scenery seemed so beautiful, with the pond and the candles, and her playing that instrument. So, I lifted my camera, and I snapped a picture with the flash on. In the midst of her playing and singing, she had stopped for a mere microsecond and slightly glanced in my direction. It was so quick and so subtle, but in my brain, it was the longest and most awkward pause of my life. She paid no mind to my presence at all. I felt as if I was rude, so I waited for a bit before speaking again. Maybe she just wanted to finish this last repeat of the song before speaking. When she slightly turned towards me, I did not see anything out of the ordinary. But a few seconds that felt like years later, my brain registered that the woman was wearing a mask. That was definitely creepy to me. But I also was naive and figured that it was a tradition of some sort. Time no longer felt real to me. I don't know how long I stood there watching her sing, but my impatience finally overpowered my introvertedness, and I spoke up again, in my poor Japanese. "Excuse me? Is the path near? I know I should not have strayed. I apologize, but..." Then, mid-sentence, she just dropped her instrument and stood up. Everything she did seemed to be in slow motion, while also happening in a mere matter of seconds. She silently stood there, a few meters away, and not facing me. This went on for a few moments before she turned in one fluid motion to face me. I was right. She was wearing a mask. I'll never forget that feeling when I first saw her up front. Her hair was pulled into a top bun. She had a slender and youngish-looking figure that was cloaked in a lavender kimono. The ends of each billowing sleeve were a shade of light blue, and the bottom of her dress was a bit muddy, but also appeared to have light blue on it. There was a bright red obi tied around her waist that seemed to really stand out, as it was made of a much nicer material, and the knot in the back was extremely intricate. Then there was the mask. It was round and mostly white with almost childlike features. The two eye slits were designed to look like eyeliner on the cartoonish eyelids drawn around it. The eyelids and the top lip were dark red, but the bottom lip was black. And now that I think of it, it might have been a mouth hole. There were no other details on the mask, not even a nose, which seemed to be the creepiest part. At this point, I wasn't outright terrified. As I said before, I was naive and in a new country, so I still thought that maybe she was just gathering her thoughts or something. I lost my shit completely though, when she took one step towards me. She had only moved her right foot forward and shifted her weight when the bun on her head suddenly became undone and all of her hair fell to her shoulders and back. It was unnaturally long and unkempt. I remember my heart sinking, and I couldn't comprehend why until a few more year-long seconds had passed by. I was drenched in sweat at this point, and I was shaking. I couldn't move or speak. She, on the other hand, just stood there. The sound of the wind through the bamboo no longer sounded beautiful. It twisted into an eerie and mournful whisper. I stared into the hollow eye slits from a few meters away from her. I didn't blink because it felt like I would die if I looked away from her. I remember an inaudible conversation between us, with me begging and pleading for my life, promising that I would delete the picture I took, and praying to a god I didn't believe in. Meanwhile, all she did was laugh. After another uncomfortable measure of time, she began to reach up, which made me clench and almost vomit. But she was just reaching for her mask. And suddenly, all of the pressure inside me faded away. I was getting so worked up over nothing. She was just going to remove her mask and speak to me and show me the way out of the forest, I thought. She was only staring at me because I'm a strange man approaching her in a dark forest. Anybody would be a bit taken aback by that. So much relief poured throughout my body. Once her hands reached her mask, and she started to lift it from her head, I immediately knew why my heart sank so hard a few moments ago. The music. It was still playing. At that moment, my body, which had relaxed into a more comfortable posture, had frozen again. And I remember the taste of stomach acid in the back of my throat. Her mournful song was still playing in the background, and the moans of the bamboo were still playing in tune with it. The mask was completely lifted from her face, and her hands just released it from above her head, and it fell to the ground with a hollow sound. I remember the noise well, because I had watched the mask fall. The first time I looked away from her face for a mere second, and when I looked back, I wished I was dead. Those eyes that I had pondered the existence of behind that mask. There were none. Nothing. Not even eyelids. Just flat skin where eyes should be. At this point, I know you're all thinking of what you would do. How you would run away, or how you would punch her in the face, or how you would do whatever. But I didn't have the benefit of hindsight. I didn't have the benefit of laying in my comfortable bed and reading this as some fictional story. No matter how scared I was, There was a part of me that lives in the facts and science of reality, where I hoped that this was just a birth defect and I was being overly judgmental or something. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Not at all. There's no longer any part of me that believes in the reality that I did before then. The eyeless woman, still mid-step, was looking right at me, despite having no eyes. I felt her gaze. I felt the pure evil emanating from her void of a face. She completed the step with her left foot, and her music grew louder, almost deafening. The sounds of bamboo and creaking wood were so loud that I wanted to cover my ears, but I couldn't. There was an enormous pounding sound, along with screeching that sounded like a poorly tuned violin. The sounds were so loud that they were enough to drive someone completely insane. They went on forever in that single moment of her second step. My whole body was covered in goosebumps, and I was trembling so hard it felt like I was going to pass out. But the adrenaline kept me standing. My fight or flight responses failed me, as I could not do either one. Her third step was accompanied by louder music and the sound of wood being ripped apart, as if it was coming from the shrine. Her fourth step, I could hear her singing again, but distorted from the pain inside of my head. Her fifth step, I was almost blinded by my own migraine. Sixth step, everything around me began to twist and unravel. On her seventh step, everything stopped completely. In the time it takes for a candle to flicker, she had completely vanished. I regained the ability to run at this point, and before I could even shift my weight, the candles flickered again, and the sound came back full force, and she was right in front of me, inches from my face. Her head was tilted, and her lips curled into the faintest, most menacing smile I've ever seen. I'll never be able to unburn it from my mind. Still unable to speak, I spun around and I planned to run as fast as I could in the opposite direction, but something cold had wrapped around my wrist. With great strength, the clasping hand of the eyeless woman spun me around to face her again. This time, her mouth had widened and her lips had curled. There was no longer much about her that looked human. She sprung forward towards my face, and I managed to use my other arm to protect myself from her. And somehow, I summoned the strength to push her off me. My arm was on fire, and the pain was spreading through me. But I didn't have any time to react. I just ran. I didn't know if she was chasing me or if it was even worth it for me to run from her. For all I knew, she would appear in front of me again. I couldn't stop though, even if the music was still deafening in my ears. I managed to run for a few minutes before it became dim, and my thoughts were almost back to me. I continued running, until I saw another light in the distance. Thinking back to earlier, honestly, I wanted to avoid it. But my legs would only carry me forward. As it was, my only hope. I remember screaming and crying as I was forcefully stopped by a man who shouted something in Japanese at me, and more people with flashlights approached. After that, I fell to the ground, and that is all I can remember. It must have been the next morning when I woke up in the hospital. My head was still ringing from the music, and my body was in a lot of pain, mainly my right arm. There were issues communicating until another Western tourist was brought in by one of the police officers to translate for me. I asked him what had happened, and after translating to the officer, he only responded with asking me where I was the night before. I told him I went off trail in the bamboo grove, and that's all. But he didn't believe me. "You are lucky," the officer said in shoddy English, bypassing the translator. "Why can't I move my arms?" I asked, groaning in pain. The American then translated from the police. "You were reported missing by your employer when you didn't contact them. But we only found you because the innkeeper searched your room and found your itinerary when you missed your checkout time yesterday. When they found you last night, you had a broken left wrist and a mamushi bite on your right forearm." "Yesterday?" I asked, completely ignoring the latter part of his explanation. "No, I check out tomorrow. That can't be right," I corrected him. Although I was very thankful to have been found, I was quite angry that they had messed up my checkout date and had gone through my things. He didn't seem convinced, so I reached over to my backpack and I showed him the folded copy of my itinerary I had in the smallest pocket. All he did was show it to the American, whose eyes then widened, and he stared at me with an odd look. I'll always remember what happened next. Here," he said, lighting up the lock screen on his phone so I could see the date and time. Everything seemed normal until I saw the date. "That can't be right," I shouted in a panic, the horrors of my experience crawling back into my mind. I was only gone for a night. "No, you were missing 3 days," the officer said to me, starting to look rather defensive. My heart dropped. None of this made any sense. That cold grip, I could still feel it on my wrist, despite it being reset and in a cast. My right arm was hardly even working. From what? A mamushi bite? I remember blocking the strike of the woman, but I never noticed that she had bit me. I spent a very long time trying to explain the situation and the occurrence of the night before, as I was still convinced was just last night. I never made it anywhere with them. My story kept being discounted. There were no shrines like the one I described. No one that worked there stayed late. There's no way that I could have hiked that long in a straight line without reaching any people. There was no break in that barricade. I didn't believe anything they were telling me, as far as I knew, they were just playing a cruel joke. I knew that there was only one thing I could do to prove I was telling the truth. I leaned over, slightly ripping out the IV in my arm that I had just become aware of, causing me to wince in pain and retract. I pointed to my camera, and the officer grabbed it from the top of my bag on the chair in my bed. He handed it to me, and the two of them leaned over my shoulders to look at me scrolling through my pictures. I remember them both commenting on how great my shots were, not knowing where I was going with all this. Then I got to the last picture I took of the toad. After this one would be the woman. Then they would realize I was not crazy. I fought all of the hesitation that was building up in my thumb, and I pressed the button with my eyes squinted shut. The two men said nothing at all. When I opened my eyes, I was more confused than they were. It was merely a picture of a snake, but coiled up and facing away from me. This only proved to them that my bite must have come from this snake after I aggravated it with my flash. But I know what I saw that night, and a mamushi would never even slightly compare to the horrors that I experienced. I was in the hospital for a few weeks after the incident. A mamushi bite takes a lot of recovery time apparently. So, after I made it out of the hospital, I was able to gather my things that they had graciously stored for me and fly back home. I was unable to complete my job, as once my employer found out that I was found hallucinating in the woods by the police, they decided it was time I come back anyway. Not that I would ever dream of staying in Japan. Nobody in Kyoto had believed me about that night. They thought that I was completely insane. I later heard that they searched that grove through and through multiple times, doing a complete sweep with search dogs, and they never found any trace of me. That's why they didn't believe me when I said I was there the whole time. The only reason they found me is because on the final sweep, when everyone was headed home, they said that one of the dogs suddenly started going nuts in the direction I'd come from. The police suspected that I was on some kind of binge, and that's why I was so shaken up, crazy when they found me. Especially with my injuries I couldn't explain. And I'm sure my job believed that as well, because they unfortunately let me go when I got back. As for the pictures on my camera, I threw the SD card away. I never thought I would ever want to be reminded of that trip again. I never planned on writing any of this down, or ever probing my memory for the finer details. There was also a part of me that was very afraid that the last picture would one day revert to what I originally saw, and I was not ready to see it again. It wasn't until this week that I had to really dig back into the events of that night, as I almost believed that maybe it was all just a hallucination. I was starting to have dreams about that night, and I thought maybe if I finally wrote about it, that I could find some kind of peace.